The Wild Robot Protects is the story of Roz the robot and her animal friends. Along the way, kids will learn about nature, science, and the environment. Welcome to the Kids Bookshelf. I'm Dan Scunner. Stay tuned as we explore the book and talk with the author about the inspiration for it. I requested and was provided with a copy of the book for this program, but this video is not sponsored. A little bit about the author. Peter Brown is the author and illustrator of many best-selling children's books, including Children Make Terrible Pets and The Curious Garden. He is the recipient of a Caldecott Honor for Creepy Carrots, 2 E.B. White Read Aloud Awards, and a Children's Choice Award for Illustrator of the Year. He joins us to talk about the third book in the New York Times best-selling Wild Robot series, The Wild Robot Protects. Peter, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Well, tell us about the Wild Robot series and what inspired it.
The Wild Robot series was, I guess you could say it was inspired by my love of both nature and technology. Years ago, I was just playing around. I'm an author and an illustrator, and I was playing around with my sketchbook, drawing pictures, and I happened to draw a picture of a robot in a tree, which for some reason really captivated my imagination. The idea of a robot out in the wilderness someplace, the last place you would expect to find a robot, and how would that robot survive, and what would wild animals think of a robot like that, And the question just kind of kept coming, and so eventually I realized I had the ingredients for a pretty interesting children's book, and so I got to work on the first book in the series, which is just called The Wild Robot. But I had a lot of more questions. Things get pretty philosophical in science fiction pretty fast. And I started wondering, well, what would a wild robot who is at home in the wilderness do if she found herself in civilization with people and technology and other robots around? And so I wrote a second wild robot book called The Wild Robot Escapes, which brings me to the new one, which comes out next week, called The Wild Robot Protects, because once again, I just had more questions about how a robot might go about protecting the things that she loves about nature. The main character's name is Roz, and she lives on an island, and mysterious form of pollution comes to her island and starts endangering the animals and places that she loves. And so I came up with this story about a robot, this sort of unnatural character, going to extraordinary lengths in order to protect a natural place. And that turned into the new book. Yeah.
Roz the robot and the goose, Brightbill, have an unusual mother-child relationship. How did that come about?
Yeah, so in the first book, The Wild Robot, I was really determined to make sure readers cared about this robot character. We see a lot of robot characters as secondary characters, but there aren't too many main characters as robots. And so I thought to myself, how can I make sure readers care? And one of the things I came up with was I thought if Roz had a family, people could relate to her more. Now, how does a robot get a family out in the wilderness? Well, she adopts an orphaned gosling, a little baby goose. And now geese are known for imprinting. They'll imprint on a scientist who's studying them and think of that scientist perhaps as their parent and follow them around. And we've learned a lot of great things about birds that way. And I thought, well, why couldn't a gosling imprint on a robot? And so that's kind of what happens. And they develop, Roz, the robot, learns to communicate with the animals. And so she develops a real mother-son relationship with this goose who she names Brightbill.
And as you pointed out, Roz can speak to animals. So there's lots of communication between Roz and the many different animals throughout the book. For what age group would you recommend this book?
Well, that's a fun question, actually. On the book, it says it's for ages 8 to 12. But what I've found is a lot of younger kids are reading it too. In fact, entire elementary schools will do this thing called One Book, One School, where everybody from kindergartner up to 5th or even 6th grade will all read the book at the same time, at different speeds and different ways. Kindergartners might have the book read to them, but and then they end up doing projects, and it's been pretty amazing to see, actually. But so I don't really know who the target age range is anymore. I thought it was 8 to 12-year-olds, but it seems more like, 5 to 14-year-olds. And a lot of adults are reading these books with their kids and really getting a lot out of them too, because there's a lot in there about family relationships that I think parents are connecting to. So I don't know who these books are for anymore.
In addition to enjoying the story, along the way, kids will also learn about the animals and their habitats in the wild as well.
One of my favorite things is watching nature documentaries. And one of my other favorite things is going out into nature, going on hikes and on trips out into the wilderness. And these books have been a real dream project for me because I get to, as part of my job, study nature, which is a thing I do anyway. In fact, if I hadn't gotten into a decent art college out of high school, my plan was to study zoology and biology. So I really love nature. I really love animals. And these books are a pretty interesting way of kind of relaying that love and those interesting facts about animals and nature to a young audience.
Peter, this is not a picture book, but it does contain illustrations. So tell us a little bit more about the overall look and feel of the book.
Yeah, so I'm an author and an illustrator, and I wanted these books to have kind of illustrations sprinkled throughout just to kind of set the tone for the story. I wanted the words to do the heavy lifting. It's not a picture book, as you said. It's not a graphic novel. It's a novel with a few illustrations that just kind of capture the mood. There might be a really poignant moment in the story that I think an illustration might just help, I don't know, kind of clarify what's happening to the reader, or really drive home a certain point. And so I've got these illustrations all throughout, and I studied illustration, so I'm an illustrator, and I take the art really seriously. The covers are in full color, and I'm pretty proud of the way they've turned out. The interior art, like many novels, have black and white illustrations, um, and yeah, they're just there to kind of reinforce the story. But of course, the images themselves are really important to me, and I take my time when I'm illustrating them.
You know, a lot of authors have to work with a separate illustrator, and sometimes they never even meet. But in your case, you're both. So do you feel like that gives you a creative advantage?
I do, actually, because I can make decisions on the fly that might never get made if there's an author and illustrator. That good authors and illustrators can create magic in their own way. Um, but I find that as I'm going, there's a lot of decisions happening really fast. I'm sketching 1 second, I'm writing the next second, I'm on my computer after that. I'm kind of bouncing back and forth, and sometimes interesting things happen when I'm using all these different parts of my brain. And I think it ends up helping me come up with a more interesting story as a result.
You pointed out earlier that Roz the Wild Robot is technology, and often technology and nature are at odds, but not so in this case.
Yeah, I know. I There was something fascinating to me about the idea that this piece of technology could become, in a way, more wild than a person could, and could, in a way, fall in love with nature more deeply than a person could because of Roz's particular set of abilities. She's got this computer brain with a perfect memory. She doesn't forget anything. She can kind of analyze patterns in the animal behavior, and that's how she kind of decodes the animal language and learns to speak with them because she can study them more closely than a person ever could. And so she ends up getting a kind of a doorway into the wilderness more in a way that no person ever could, by learning to speak with them, by observing them so closely, by developing relationships and having conversations with them and learning directly from the animals about their own experiences. Um, and and so that kind of surprising relationship between technology and nature was really what drove the story from the very start.
Peter, you said these books encompass areas of your interest, so you come to a book with a certain amount of knowledge. But as you were putting this book together, were there some research challenges for you?
Well, I don't know if there's challenges so much, although the biggest challenge with research is just that it takes time. And sometimes I'm so eager to get down to the business of writing and illustrating, it can be sometimes frustrating. I really enjoy research, but it does take time. I read a lot of books. I watch a lot of documentary films and series. There's so many great series out there that are pretty easily available these days with streaming services. And so I just have to put in the time to learn. Each book uh, takes place in a different setting. The first book is on this island wilderness, kind of reminiscent of maybe something you'd find off the coast of Alaska. The second book takes place in large part on a farm. So I had to think about the future of farming, and I was reading a lot of books about that. And then the third book takes place in large part in kind of the Arctic region. And so I had to learn about all those types of animals and settings. I love the process, the research process. It's one of my favorite parts of being an author and illustrator. But it does take time.
And one of the reasons I think Roz is a fun character is because she brings so many different skills to a situation. And as you point out in this latest novel, she has the ability to go into the ocean and find the source of this poison tide that's encroaching on the island.
Yeah. So in the first two books, I made a big deal out of Roz the robot being kind of afraid of the water, is the way I think I phrased it, because I needed her to be vulnerable. If this robot was invincible, it'd be hard to care about her. And so for the first two books, she doesn't want to go into deep water because she just knows kind of instinctively that the water can find its way into her body and do damage. And so she avoids it altogether. One of the big reveals in the third book, which you learn pretty early on, so this hopefully won't be a spoiler to anybody who is looking forward to reading this book. But one of the big reveals in the third book is that she realizes that because she's gotten this new body, a new robotic body at the end of the second story, she's now able to go into deep water, which opens up a whole universe of opportunities for her. She can, she lives on an island, right? So suddenly the ocean is fair game, and she explores the ocean on her way to trying to solve this mysterious pollution that they call the poison tide. She has this incredible adventure to the bottom of the ocean and across the tundra and on icebergs and all the way to basically something kind of like the North Pole. And man, it was really fun imagining all the places and creatures that she would come across on that kind of a journey.
Peter, in addition to being a fun read and an engaging story, what do you hope kids are going to be taking away from it?
I think my main hope is that kids will maybe come away with a better appreciation for the way that we're all connected. In the story, the ocean is connected to the land and connected to the sky. Things that happen kind of on the other side of the planet are having a direct effect on the main characters of the story. The truth is that all of us, people, animals, plants, in real life, we're all intimately connected and intertwined in ways that we don't always realize. And so my hope is that kids will read this book and look around a little differently and realize that we really need to take care of the world and each other.
This is the third novel in the Wild Robot series. This is The Wild Robot Protects by Peter Brown. Peter, thank you for talking with me today.
Thank you.
Now, if you'd like to get a copy of The Wild Robot Protects, I've placed a link for you in the description below. Well, thank you for watching this edition of the Kids Bookshelf. And if you'd like to see more videos about children's books and their authors, be sure to like, subscribe, and click on the bell to be notified about future programs. I'm Dan Skinner. Until next time, keep sharing the gift of reading.